Welcome everybody to another Pod for Israel episode, and this time we have a really special, important program. My name is Golan, and I'm privileged to host Eli Haitov. Studied philosophy, has an MA in philosophy. You can tell us more about that. But this is a very important subject. We're going to talk about the soul. We're going to talk about consciousness and how it all points to God. Why is it so important?
Right, so it's not just a philosophical debate, like theoretical debate, but these questions are actually touching the nature of reality. Who we are, right? Why are we here even? So is there anything beyond physical reality? So these questions are very crucial because if consciousness is non-physical, it points towards a non-physical reality that may explain why we possess non-physical consciousness.
Now we did it. This is so important. We did it in Hebrew, but this is so important, and we thought we have to do it also in English.
Exactly.
Because, as you said, if we have an unnatural consciousness, it points to an unnatural, supernatural being.
Exactly.
But let's start with the problem. What is the problem of body and soul?
The mind-body problem.
Body and mind problem.
Right, that's a problem in philosophy, and it's actually two problems. So the first problem is, what is consciousness? What is experience? What's the nature of it? Okay, so is it something physical or non-physical?
Is it pure physical? Is it pure natural?
Is it a physical quality? Okay, or is it something non-physical?
Even supernatural.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's the problem.
Right, that's the first problem. The second problem is even more difficult because now we're asking, okay, but who is the one experiencing? What is it? Who possesses consciousness? Is it the soul or the brain?
So is it my physical brain who has the consciousness or something beyond?
Right. In other words, it's a question about your identity. Who are you? Are you your soul or are you just your body or your brain?
So you presented two problems. So what are some of the solutions or the answers for these problems?
Right, so there are main two theories in philosophy of mind. The first one is Physicalism, which says that there's nothing non-physical about you. You are just a physical stuff.
Just matter, pure physical.
And your consciousness is just a physical property, nothing else. The other theory is called dualism. You have two theories or two sub-theories.
So dualism has two sub-theories.
Right. So you have property dualism, which says that your consciousness is non-physical, but you are your brain, you are your body. Like you are as a substance physical, but your consciousness is non-physical.
Okay.
The other one says, it's called substance dualism, which I will defend today. It says that in addition to non-physical properties, there are also non-physical substances. So you are your soul. You're a supernatural soul.
So the true me is my soul, my consciousness.
Exactly. You are using your brain as a tool to experience, just like you use your car to drive.
So how do we know which theory is right? And the study of the brain, can it give us the answer?
So I would submit to you that it's impossible to decide which theory is correct by brain sciences. Why? Because science only studies the physical reality.
Science is limited.
It cannot answer the question, is there something beyond the physical? Now, I'll give you an illustration. So we know that if some kind of neuron is damaged, then you will not experience empathy, okay?
Yes.
But it can be interpreted in two ways, or even three. Anyways, it can be interpreted as saying that your empathy is nothing but neurons firing, right? Or you can say that no, empathy is non-physical, but it's dependent upon your neurons, right?
Like the software is dependent on the hardware.
Yeah, so these solutions are empirically equivalent. So you cannot decide which one is the correct one with brain sciences. No, brain sciences only gives you the data.
And it studies only the physical brain, so it cannot answer.
Exactly.
It cannot give us an answer for something that is beyond the physical, supernatural.
Exactly.
Okay, so the study of the brain, the physical study of the brain, cannot give us the answer. So how would we know who's right? How would we know which of the theory is correct?
So if it cannot be answered physically, we answer it metaphysically.
There's
right?
metaphysics.
We use philosophical tools, arguments pro and against.
Okay. So the next question is the consciousness physical?
So I would say that consciousness cannot be physical for at least 5 reasons, and now we'll talk about them. The first reason is what's called the problem of qualia. What's qualia? Qualia is the what it's like to experience something. So we have a what it's like, this qualitative character of consciousness. So for instance, when you have pain, there is a what it's like to experience pain. And I'll show now why it's impossible to say that this what it's like, this qualia, is a physical property. Okay?
Why?
So there is a famous illustration. It's called Mary's room. So Mary is a brilliant scientist.
Imagine a woman named Mary in a room.
She's a brilliant scientist. She knows everything there is to know about your sight, colors, your brain, everything. She's omniscient physically.
But she's limited to a room which is only black and white.
She is located in a room without colors, just black and white. Okay? She has never seen any color. One day, suddenly, she walks out of the room, and for the first time in her life, she sees red.
The color red.
Now the question is, does Mary learn something new?
I think she experienced something new, right?
Okay. So Mary learned what it's like to experience red, right? But she didn't have this knowledge before.
Right. She didn't have the consciousness to red.
Why didn't she have this knowledge if she had all the physical information?
Exactly.
Right? She had all the physical information about colors and sight and brain, but it couldn't capture this qualia, this what it's like to experience red. And this showed that this qualia, this inner experience, it cannot be captured by physics.
So it's even if I memorize the cooking book, a recipe I memorize, and I know exactly, in the theory, I know how to make this dish. If I don't taste it, I would not experience. My consciousness would be lacking.
Right. You cannot get subjective knowledge from objective knowledge. Okay, from what's called third-person perspective knowledge.
So you said there's five reasons. And that's
the first reason.
One.
The second one is what's called intentionality. Our mental states, like beliefs and thoughts, have the property of intentionality. What it means is that they point to something.
Focus.
They refer to something beyond themselves. Now, why is it a problem for physicalism? First of all, think about physical object like this table, okay? Does this table refer to anything?
Nothing.
Anything?
We refer to the table. It doesn't refer to anything.
Right. Or think about a sign.
A sign on the road.
Right. If it just magically appears out of nowhere, does it suddenly refer to anything?
No. We give it
we
the
have
meaning.
to give it meaning, right? We decide that it's going to refer to something.
Like letters, right? Like letters in languages. They don't mean anything if you don't know the language. It's just pieces of drawing on the paper.
Right. So that's the first reason why intentionality is non-physical. The second one is that intentionality is a property, like you can refer to something that is non-existent. For example, I can think of Zeus.
You can imagine something.
Yes, it can refer to something that is not here or doesn't exist or cannot exist. But physical relations necessarily assume that the things that are related are there.
So if you were 100% just material, how can you imagine something immaterial?
How can you refer to something that doesn't exist if it's a physical relation, right? So these two reasons show why intentionality is non-physical.
Okay, what about the third thing?
The third reason, I think, is one of the most powerful reasons, is that, Golan, only you have a direct access to your thoughts and beliefs and consciousness in general.
So even if somebody, God forbid, cuts my head into two and watches my brain,
you don't need to cut your head. You can just scan your brain and know everything there is to know about all the function of your brain, but the scientists will not know what you're dreaming of,
so
or
even
what you're
if they
thinking about.
Scan my brain 100% with the best technology, they wouldn't see my thoughts,
right?
My consciousness.
It's a problem of private access. Only you have private access to your consciousness, but physical states are public. There is nothing about physics. There is something private.
The scan would show the physical thing, but nothing about...
Nothing can be hidden. Everything is objective and public. But why is it? What is there about your consciousness that is private?
Exactly.
It cannot be answered.
So that was the third thing?
Yes. The fourth reason is that there are just a number of different properties that are not physical. For instance, your mental states, like beliefs and thoughts, can be true or false, right? True beliefs, false beliefs.
If I believe that today is Wednesday,
Right.
It could be true or false.
But physical states are not true or false. Like this bottle,
it either exists or not.
no, right, it doesn't have any content to make it false or true.
Right.
Another property of mental state is that they don't have location, they don't have mass, right? These properties are not,
Exactly.
they do not belong to consciousness, right?
You can't trace the thought weights this amount.
Where is your thought,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Where is
How
it?
much does it weight? What's the color of my thought?
What is it made of, right?
Exactly. You cannot process it in a physical lab to see my thought and analyze my thought.
Exactly. That was the fourth reason. The last one is that your mental states cannot exist without you. For instance, your pain doesn't like just exist here somewhere independently of you. No, you are the one who experiences pain, right?
Exactly.
So pain cannot exist independently of you. It is
must
dependent
have
upon
me.
your subject,
Yes.
on the subject. But physical properties or physical states like neurons, right? We can just take them out of your brain and they can exist independently of you,
Okay.
right?
So how are the physical positions explain the consciousness? Do they have an explanation for consciousness?
So I'm going to talk about two kinds of explanations. The first one is called identity theory. And this theory says that consciousness is just a physical, it's just your neuron firing. Okay, so for example,
Pure physical?
neurons firing is pain. That's what's pain. That's what pain is. There is nothing beyond it, nothing above or beyond it. So when you experience pain, what actually happens is just neurons firing. That's the first
That's the
theory.
first.
The second theory says that no, it's not something specific. It's not a specific physical state, but it's a function of a physical state. Okay, so
Okay.
any physical state that plays the role of pain is pain. That's pain. So it doesn't have to be C fiber firing. It doesn't have to be C fiber. It can be anything that plays the role.
Okay.
That's functionalism.
But is there another explanation? What about the identity theory or something?
That's the identity theory that I just mentioned, and there are problems with this
Exactly.
theory.
What are the problem with the identity theory?
So the first problem is what's called the multiple realizability problem, which says that pain, for example, can be realized in many animals, for example, in many places. So you don't need to have C fiber to experience pain. Right? If you have a different brain, if some animal has a different brain, it doesn't have C fiber, it can still sense pain. So pain cannot be identical to C fiber firing. If it were identical, then other animals wouldn't feel pain, right?
Exactly. That's the first one.
The second problem is that so many identity theorists would claim that as we can
Reduce?
reduce heat to mean kinetic energy, in the same way we can reduce mental state to physical states. But the problem is that the reason we can allegedly reduce heat to mean kinetic energy is that we can distinguish between heat and what it truly is, okay? But how can we distinguish between what pain is to how it appears to us? There is no difference.
Exactly.
Right? Like when we experience pain, it appears to us as painful, but it is painful. There is nothing beyond it that is true, that is the true pain.
Exactly,
Right?
I understand.
So we cannot reduce it. It's just pain.
Okay. So what are the problems with the theory of functionalism?
Functionalism, right.
Functionalism.
So the first problem of functionalism is that it tries to reduce mental states to input and output. But this creates all sorts of problems. For instance, remember the qualia property, the what it's like to experience something. So you can have the correct output from the input without sensing anything, right? We can create a robot that
Purely physical robot.
that says ouch and goes to a different state when we punch it,
Exactly.
right? So you can have the correct output given the input, but it doesn't mean that you explain the qualia.
It's like a character in a computer game that you punch in the face and it's ouch, but there's no consciousness.
There's no inner experience,
Exactly.
right? The second problem is this. According to functionalism, the following scenario is possible or logical. If I punch you, Golan, and instead of feeling pain, you feel pleasure, and this pleasure causes you to say ouch and be sad, according to functionalism, what you actually experience is pain. Why? Because you have the input of pain and the output of pain. It doesn't care about your inner experience.
Even though
it doesn't matter.
I liked it, yeah, and it gave me pleasure. But
as long as your inner state functions correctly, it's pain.
Exactly.
It doesn't
I
matter
understand.
that it's pleasure. You see why it's absurd?
Yes.
The third problem, and the last one, is that this theory would mean that you cannot know immediately what you experience. You have to wait to see what the output is, right?
Yeah. You have to step by step, and only after the final step you can actually see what you're feeling.
Exactly.
What's
But
the consciousness?
That's absurd because we are immediately aware of our conscious experience.
Okay, so let me ask you with no hesitation. So, does the consciousness points to the existence of a supernatural being like God?
I think so, and here's the argument that I would like to present. It goes like this. Number one,
The explanation for consciousness is either found inside or outside the universe. 2. If the explanation is found outside the universe, then the explanation refers to a transcendent conscious being. 3. The explanation for consciousness is not found inside the universe. Thus, 4. The explanation for consciousness is found outside the universe. Thus, 5. The explanation for consciousness refers to a transcendent conscious being.
So consciousness indeed shows that there is a transcendent being that we call God.
right, because think about it. What other reality can explain better consciousness? As I said, you start with physical stuff without any potentiality for consciousness, or you start with another consciousness that can explain our consciousness.
Okay, so what about the theory of emergentism?
Emergentism. Is it's not a theory against God or something. It's just a theory that can be used to argue that God doesn't have to be the explanation for consciousness. So this theory says that you can start with material particles without any potentiality of consciousness, but as soon as the material stuff reaches some level of complexity, suddenly consciousness emerges. Out of nothing.
Wow.
It's just a miracle, unexplained brute fact, okay? Nothing that can account for that. Now,
The problem.
what is the problem with this? There are two problems. The first one is that saying emergentism, or saying that consciousness emerges from the brain, is just a problem to be solved.
It doesn't solve the problem. It
It's
creates
not a
another
solution.
problem.
It's just a problem. How does it emerge from the brain, right? The second problem is that emergentism amounts to saying that there is creation out of nothing. Why? Because, again, if you start with particles that are bereft of consciousness, you cannot get consciousness by just a different combination, right?
The recipe wouldn't create a consciousness out of
Right.
material.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter how you change the recipe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about the theory of panpsychism?
Panpsychism. It's another theory that
panpsychism.
can be used to say that God doesn't have to be the explanation for consciousness. And it says that actually the particles do have potentiality for consciousness.
So even the particles in this cup
Yes.
has consciousness.
Yes. The consciousness is simple, but there is consciousness at some level. The problem here is what's called the unity of consciousness. How do we get from different particles with consciousness just a unity of consciousness? How do we get a unified experience? Because think about it. If we start with particles,
And every particle has a conscious.
what do we need to get?
Many.
Many conscious experiences, right?
But
But we have one unified vision, one unified experience of many things like sight and hearing and taste, or mass and location and all sorts of
we
stuff
have a
at
unified
once.
consciousness.
Right, at once, unified. So this theory cannot explain it.
Okay. So the panpsychism doesn't help.
Doesn't help.
Doesn't hold water. So let me ask you this: what does the soul has to do with it?
Okay, so now that's the second problem that we're trying to answer. What is the substance of consciousness? Who possesses consciousness? What possesses it? Is it your brain or your soul?
The actual software. What is it?
Yeah, and again, it's a different question, because even if your mental states are non-physical, the question who possesses it, okay, that's a different question.
Okay.
And what I'm going to argue is that it's not your brain that possesses consciousness, it's your soul.
Okay. So what is the soul?
So the soul is a simple entity. It's not made of separable parts. It endures through time. It remains the same.
It doesn't change.
Right? And its properties are the conscious properties. Okay, so like mental states as beliefs, sensations, and thoughts, and so on.
And how do we know that the soul actually exists?
So the first argument, that it's actually my favorite argument for the soul, It's called the argument from the unity of consciousness. We just talked about it. So let's define the unity of consciousness. There are two kinds of unity of consciousness. The first one is called phenomenal unity, and the second one is subjective unity. Phenomenal unity means that there is one stream of consciousness that, as I said, includes many details. Okay, so I can talk to you, and I'm aware of the cameras, and I'm aware of the books all at once. Okay, and the colors, everything. That's phenomenal consciousness. Subjective unity means that all of this experience belongs to one subject. There is one subject that experiences everything at once, not many subjects. Now, what is the problem with physicalism in this sense? The problem is, again, what is my brain?
Physical, pure matter.
It's an aggregate of parts,
exactly.
right? Aggregate of many cells and neurons, right? So let's say that one neuron is responsible for one experience, a second one for the other experiences, and so on. Who is the one who experiences everything at once, right? What unifies all these experiences at once, right?
Right.
There is nothing to do it because there is no part in the brain that does all the job, like everything simultaneously.
Yeah.
So on physicalism, you can't have a unified vision, a unified experience. That's the argument for
So that's
unity.
one argument for the soul.
Right. So how does the soul solve it? If you're a simple entity, not made out of parts that are responsible for many aspects of consciousness, then you can experience everything at once as a simple subject.
Okay. That's one argument for the soul. Are there any other arguments for the existence of the soul, of the spirit?
The second argument that I'm going to use is what's called the argument from the perseverance of your identity. Okay, your identity remains the same. Golan remained the same 5 years ago as he is now. Okay, you didn't. Your subject, who you are, didn't change, though your qualities may be changed. Maybe you forget stuff, but it doesn't mean that you did not remain the same.
I know that I'm the same person.
Right, you are aware of yourself as the same one. And if we didn't remain the same, it will make sense that we would fear like giving an account to, if we like rob a bank.
Exactly.
Why are we afraid of judgment?
We wouldn't know. Yeah.
Right, we wouldn't know it because we wouldn't remain the same.
Exactly.
There would be someone else. So physicalism cannot explain it. Why? Because if you're just your brain and your body, do you remain the same, Golan? If you're just your brain and your body? No, your body always changes.
Parts are always changing.
There is always change. You're always in flux. Okay, so physicalism cannot explain the unity of yourself over time. That's another problem. Now let's move to the problems.
Yeah. What are the arguments against the existence of the soul, and what's the problem with them?
Okay, so the first argument against the existence of the soul is the problem of interaction. Okay, in other words, how does my spiritual substance relate to the body? How does it affect the body? That's the problem.
The software and the hardware.
Exactly. So even if we didn't have an answer to that, it doesn't mean that the soul doesn't affect the body. Why? Because there are all sorts of things that we don't understand how they work together or how they affect each other, but we still know that they do affect each other. Like gravity or electrical fields, right? We don't know how the mechanism works, how they affect from so far away other objects, but we do know it happens. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we don't need to ask the question, how it happens assumes that there is like a mechanism, intermediate mechanism between the soul and the body, but there isn't, right? The soul immediately affects the body.
Exactly.
So this question just is irrelevant because it happens immediately.
Okay. Another argument against the existence of the soul.
Another argument against the soul is the argument from naturalistic evolution. And it says, in other words, that we as human beings are just the product of naturalistic evolution. Now,
Purely natural.
yeah. And naturalistic evolution would not produce anything spiritual, right? You just begin with the soul. It acknowledges this problem that we talked about with Emergentism. You begin with particles devoid of consciousness, and you would not get consciousness or soul, spiritual soul. And then it says, but we are a product of naturalistic evolution, therefore we don't have a soul.
The problem is...
What's the problem? What do you think is the problem?
The assumption, right?
The assumption is problematic. The assumption is circular because we wouldn't agree that we are the product of a naturalistic evolution. So we would dispute premise 2, that humans are the product of naturalistic evolution. So if we if we just don't agree with this premise, the conclusion doesn't follow.
I get it. I understand. So that's another argument against, and we saw the problem with it. Is there another argument against?
Another one is that the physical reality is closed. Okay? There is no room for the soul to act. Because only physical stuff have causal power. So if the reality is closed, how can the soul affect the body? And now if the soul doesn't have power to affect the body, it doesn't exist, because existence is defined by being causally active, causal powers, right?
And of course, the problem with that theory,
we don't agree that physical reality is closed, right?
Exactly.
That's the thing that needs to be proven. But what's the argument for that? You cannot just assume it to refute the soul. No. That's the question that's begging the question, in other words.
Another argument? Is there
another argument is that we don't want to multiply entities beyond what is needed.
Okay.
In other words, we want to make reality as simple as possible. Okay, you don't want to introduce something new as the soul. So let's just not say that the soul exists, because we want it to be simple. We want just physical reality to exist.
What's the problem?
So the problem is that this criterion of simplicity is a tiebreaker. It's only when two explanations are equivalent. That's when you use this criterion to say, okay, I have two explanations that are equivalent. Let's choose the simple one. But are the two theories equivalent, dualism and physicalism? As we saw, dualism explains more. It has greater explanatory power and scope. So it doesn't mean, we cannot say that dualism and physicalism are just equivalent, and therefore we can prefer physicalism because it's simpler. That's not the case. So the last argument, the last objections against the soul is that we are dependent upon our brain. Because we are dependent upon our brain, there is no soul.
And they mean the physical brain.
Right. We're dependent upon our physical bodies and brain. Now, Golan, I have a question. If I'm dependent on my car to come to work, to get to work, does that mean that I'm my car?
No. You're a different entity than your car. Even if your car breaks down, you're still a different entity.
Right. So even if I'm using my brain to think and experience, and I'm dependent upon my brain to do that, it doesn't mean that I am my brain. So this argument is not sufficient to show that I'm identical to my brain.
And the problems that we showed do point to the existence of the soul. And if the soul exists, what does it say about the supernatural, about a supernatural being?
So again, if we show that consciousness and who we are is non-physical, then the question arises, what reality best explains this data?
Yeah, and where did the soul come from?
Yes. Is it physicalism, atheism, naturalism? Does that better explain this data?
We saw it's not possible.
Or theism. We start with a conscious being, with a soul that can explain why we possess a soul and why we are conscious.
So let's sum all this discussion up to three really simple points. So we started with consciousness. What did we say about consciousness?
Consciousness is non-physical. It's a non-physical property. The second one is that consciousness points towards the existence of God. And third, we are, as humans, who we are not our brain. We are actually a supernatural soul.
Our true self is the soul, which is supernatural, points to a supernatural being, which is the source of the soul.
And that's the best explanation.
Thank you, Eli Haitov. Thank you very much.
If this touched your heart, will you help pay it forward to reach others who need to hear this message? Partner with our team to bring the gospel to Israel and the nations.